Hello. Pekka Kallioniemi here. Welcome to this second episode of The Free World. Today or tonight, wherever you are, which time zone, we have three people here discussing. Drew, of course, is here. And then we have Joni Askola. Maybe you can do a brief introduction of yourself.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
I was just going to say, unfortunately, Kraut was too sleepy, I think, this morning. But it's okay, we're rotating. Yes, Joni, you go ahead.
Thanks.
You're Finnish as well?
Yeah, I'm Finnish as well, but I grew up in France, but now I'm here in Finland, and I'm a PhD candidate from Finland, and I do some research on social policy, but I'm also posting geopolitical analysis on Twitter and Blue Sky and YouTube, and trying to counter Russian disinformation. So happy to be here.
You do it really well.
Thank you.
Well, you had Elon denounce you personally as a retard on Twitter
true.
a couple of months ago.
True. That's my greatest achievement until now, at least. So
how does it feel, Joni, when it's like the richest bloke in the world, and he's like just a guy who has like massive amounts of power, operates the world's largest satellite internet system, etc., and he's just randomly found one of your tweets and calling you these mean names?
It was crazy. When I woke up, I had some screenshots sent to me by some friends, and I didn't believe it. I thought that they had photoshopped it or something. But then I logged in on Twitter and checked it out, and it was real. And it's a scary feeling, but it was at the same time it was nice because I knew that it would get a lot of attention. So it was both at the same time. But I think you've also interacted with Elon on Twitter, right?
Yeah, I actually regret my interaction with him because, look, I am a little bit more conservative on some matters, and I guess for me, like that happened as a result of like October 7 and some of the really horrific kind of like protests we've seen across Europe and everything. And I was just critical of the situation in Britain where there was large scale sexual abuse and very little done by the British authorities to look into it. And look, I was just tweeting and Elon reshared me. And look, the sad thing, and I've talked about this actually I talked about this with Vlad Vexler, which was interesting. Like, you feel the problem, right, is audience capture and also algorithm capture. And you have all this when that happens, it was just random. It was so surprising that suddenly he was resharing me. When that happens, there's like this overwhelming kind of pressure, like to just kind of conform, be a sort of Ian Miles Chong type person who's like completely, he's yes man, and then that's he only interacts on Twitter with people who worship him, and that's how you get your big Twitter payouts, etc. But I just couldn't do that in the end because look, I was just so absolutely outraged and felt just the enormous sense of betrayal alongside all the Ukrainians and pro-freedom individuals across the world when, the first month of the Trump administration was just insane. It was so hard because, Australia, we rely on the US alliance. America voted. I was trying my best to sort of like keep an open mind and just give a grace period to the new administration. I was hopeful at first that maybe the appointment of people like Waltz and Rubio might moderate it. But no, of course not. It was just full-blown insanity. And yeah, we're now recording like right after Liberation Day, which is just like the most insane. It's like just literally Maoism. And yeah, I actually really, as a result, I really regret the fact that like I had that brief interaction with Elon in January because honestly, at this point, he's just completely irredeemable. It's very sad. Like, a couple years ago, what he had done with SpaceX and things like that was amazing. And it was great at the start of the war when he helped Ukraine. But at this point, he's irredeemable. That's just the sad reality.
Yeah, but I guess there's also a positive side to it because you probably got some more reach thanks to that, at least at that time. And then you can push more content that is helpful to Ukraine and so on. So it's at the end of the day, it's still probably a good thing that it happened. So, yeah.
Has he ever interacted with you, Pekka, which is funny?
No, absolutely nothing. I think
he would have seen there's 100% chance he saw your thread on him.
Yes, probably. Yeah. I think he just tries to kind of not give me any visibility, I mean, I'm probably one of the most harshest critics of Elon on X. So it's probably just trying to take the oxygen out, so that it doesn't evolve into anything more dramatic, which is a good strategy probably to him, because he has 220 million followers. I have 200,000, so it doesn't really make sense to start conversing or arguing.
The weird thing is, he did it to Joni though. I wonder why. I wonder why he just read it. What was your post again that caused you to have that reaction, Johnny?
It was just some random post where I said that the EU needs to regulate social media because Elon Musk has become the biggest spreader of disinformation in the world. But the thing is, he answered me at 3 a.m. In Florida. It was 3 a.m. when he answered me. I think he was in Mar-a-Lago. So my guess is that he was high on ketamine or something, and he was just pissed when he saw my tweet, and then he ended up answering. And because at that point, I think I had 50,000 followers or something, so I was quite small, but he probably didn't see me as a threat or anything, so he just ended up going all in and insulting me.
It was all emotion.
Yeah.
It was just full on emotion. But can I throw a theory out there? I don't think it's Elon, because it's basically with Elon Musk's account, there's tweets around the clock, basically. I think he uses AI also to post, or there is, I don't know, some big balls type of guy who posts for him also. I don't think it's just Elon controlling the account.
It's possible that it's not only him, but my guess is that when he insults people, it's probably him most of the time, because if you employ someone to take care of your Twitter account and to post for you, that person is unlikely to take any major risks or to insult someone. So I would guess that maybe the insults are probably him. I'm not sure, but that's my guess. But
dude, he lost his mind. The ketamine, I think that's honestly what's happened. You see videos of him speaking 10 years ago, and he can speak fluently and eloquently on complex scientific topics, and then now there's just you can see a marked decline in his sort of cognitive ability and his verbal fluency and stuff. I don't know. Have you noticed that, Pekka?
I think he's definitely in decline. I think one of the saddest video of him is it Kill Tony, where he is bring comedy back, and it was just so cringe, the whole video where he was trying to be funny. Yeah, where he was trying to be funny, and it's just okay, it's like a car crash. You cannot watch away. You just have to see what happens next, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I mean, I think he's basically lost. He's probably working too much, probably using too much drugs. Just I don't know. It seems wild.
I think it's drugs. Honestly, I think it's drugs. The ketamine stuff.
Yeah, and I think if you add to that, I think he also has this thing that we've seen. We all know some people who have fallen for conspiracy theories, and it's sort of a vicious circle where once you start believing conspiracy theories and you get deeper and deeper, at some point you think that everything is a conspiracy theory. And I think that there might be a bit of that as well in his case, but and also opportunism, because he saw an opportunity with Donald Trump and he went all in, and it kind of gives him an incentive to continue this insanity that he's been pushing, because it works for him. He managed to get to the White House through that in a way. So,
you know what's amazing though? Look at the tariffs that are now smashing Tesla. You actually look at that and you're like, how does Elon tolerate that, right? He's got a lot of power over Trump, so why does he accept that? It's crazy.
Yeah, but I think Elon, the scary thing about him is that we can think a lot of things about him, but I think that one difference between him and most other powerful people or rich business people is that he tends to think in the long term. So he's someone who has some of these ambitions that he wants to fulfill in life. Could be Mars, could be something else. We don't know what it is, but he has some ambitions, and I think that he's ready to take some short-term pain. He sees his companies as a means to get there. So for him, of course, he doesn't want the Tesla stock to go too low and so on, but I think that he's ready to take some short-term pain to be able to reach his dreams, and that's what's scary about him, because most people care about the revenue at the end of the year, but I think he doesn't. He thinks a bit more in the long term, in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tesla is putting a lot of effort into robots, robot development, and I mean tariffs will, whatever you do, tariffs will hurt your business right now. But I mean, Elon has been incredibly good at looking into the future. You look at Starlink, for example. You look at Tesla, which for a long time before everything was kind of stolen by the Chinese, all the technology, it dominated the car market, the car business. So he has this kind of he's a visionary. I give him that, but he's also a fucking stupid visionary right now. I think he's definitely in decline.
I was just going to say, Pekka, like, what a massive mistake he made in China. Like, he did technology transfers, and BYD like stole so much technology, and like they're now like surpassing him in a lot of fields. It's crazy.
But Drew, I have a question for you.
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned that you went back and forth with Elon about the kind of immigration-related issues in Europe. How do you see Europe? Maybe you could summarize. How do you see? Because we are the biggest defenders of Europe right now. We are the EU warriors with Joni. Not just joking, but I mean we are from here. We kind of maybe understand the geopolitical situation and the political situation in Europe, I would say, quite well. But I would be interested in hearing, how do you see the situation in Europe?
Look, I obviously you guys would know it better than me, but I think, you know, there's long-term problems with like economic stagnation, and I mean, obviously that's particularly pronounced in Britain. You know, there's Macron put it very well when he had the you know, when he was calling for massive strategic investment across the economy. You know, the Draghi report. Like, I really support the Draghi report. Like, there just needs to be way more investment. You know, for so long the Germans have basically like pursued like, you know, very, very you know, austere spending habits. And, you know, there's been a lack of investment across the economy. That also probably, you know, feeds into, you know, stagnation when it comes to innovation, stuff like that. There's the long-term challenge of, you know, energy independence. And, you know, Germany shutting down the nuclear power plants was unfortunately like one of probably the worst decisions of the past, you know, 25 years, I think, in world politics. Like, if you look at that, I mean, just the decision to shut down the nuclear power plants, and you replace it with the brown coal, and you replace it with, Russian gas dependency, like just such a disaster on so many different levels. And I look, the way I see the issue with migration is, you know, there's two different parts to it, right? The first part is, you know, the economic question. How much can a society actually absorb without, you know, facing, for example, things like housing shortages? For example, in Australia right now, that's a big problem because we've got a situation where in January, like housing demand was double the amount of supply in the economy. And we've had, I think, the record highest rate of migration we've seen in the entire history of Australia just over the past year or two. So that's put a lot of pressure on the housing market. That's one aspect to it. The other aspect, I think, is social cohesion. And obviously, it's very difficult here because you've got the Ian Miles Chongs of the world. You've got like Radio Genoa. These guys are not even European. And like they're just literally there as like sort of chaos agents. Like they'll just obviously clip things out of context, and they're just trying to demoralize people in Europe and make them, you know, the whole narrative, Europe's fallen, blah, blah, blah. Europe's already like, you know, Sharia law land or whatever. Like obviously they go too far, it's extreme, etc. I think there has been a difficulty with, you know, assimilation and integration with the massive migration wave that we saw over the past 10 years in Europe. I mean, it undoubtedly did help the far right come to power across many European countries. And I guess I look at things in a very pragmatic sense, and I'm like, I'm a liberal, and, you know, soft, you know, small L liberalism at the end of the day. And I love, you know, the European project. I love democracy. And I guess my approach to it is like, listen, if, you know, weakness at the border then results in, you know, these horrible pro-Russia stooge parties like AfD coming to power, I think the response from more mainstream political, you know, configurations should be just like rob them of oxygen, right? By just implementing, you know, a more sane strategy when it comes to migration. I think there's been polling across a lot of countries in Europe that states that, this is probably particularly pronounced in Britain, where a top issue for a lot of people across the electorate for the past couple of years for the past 10, 15 years in Britain has been wanting to decrease the migration rate. But every single time a government comes into power, it never does that. Even Boris, who came into power with the whole, we're going to take back control from Europe so we can take control of immigration. The interesting and ironic thing is he presided over what is now called the Boris wave, where Boris, who advocated Brexit in terms of, taking back control, we're going to make Britain independent of Europe, therefore we're going to take control of our migration policy again. He presided over the largest migration increase, I think, in the entire history of Britain. And that has come with problems like economic shortages, also comes with problems of social cohesion. And look, there have been those independent reports when it came to those migrant grouping gang issues in Britain. There were independent reports by very senior figures in the judiciary who did find that part of the problem was partly political correctness and people being very concerned about taking on this issue because they don't want to be perceived as racist. My big worry is that if liberals and centrists don't talk about this in a moderate way, then we're going to allow people like Ian Miles Chong and Radio Genoa and stuff to monopolize these issues. And they're going to use that to put people like the AfD into power, put people like Le Pen into power. And these parties are, stooges of the Russians. So much of this stuff is promoted by Russia to, they promote these chaos agents just to, weaken Europe. And Europe, we saw what Russia did as well in Poland, where they literally were flying some migrants up to Belarus, and then they were trying to send them across the border just literally to destabilize Poland. So we see how Russia weaponizes this issue. And I guess my perspective as a sort of as a more centrist, moderate type figure is I think the right strategy is not to ignore it, but to try and take the thunder away from the far right, take away their oxygen by speaking about these issues, hopefully in a way that can be more intellectual, can be rational, doesn't go into fear-mongering and xenophobia and stuff, but just a rational discussion about, things like social cohesion and stuff like that. I don't know. I've obviously talked a little bit too much about this, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I talked about this with Vlad Vexler in our podcast, which was really interesting. And he was also somewhat agreeing with me where he said, if liberals, centrists don't take a hold of this issue, it's the main issue that is giving rise to the populist far right across Europe, but also in America. That's how Trump came to power. I guess my pragmatic thing is if refusing to sort of police the southern border of America leads to Trump coming to power and Trump blowing up everything, then Democrats should just police the southern border and just stop people like Trump coming back to power. What do you guys think? It's interesting.
Okay, we're running out of time, Drew. You talk so long.
Sorry.
So let's wrap it up. No, just kidding. I think we have. My personal view is that there are good models in Europe. Denmark has a very good model for immigration, for example. And Germany is also moving towards that kind of system, I think. Let's see how the government will look like. But Joni, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, those were really interesting points, and Drew knows a lot about Europe. I think the interesting thing with immigration is that people's perception doesn't really reflect realities. So if you look at Russia, for example, a lot of people believe that Russia is anti-immigration and so on. Well, Russia in reality, I lived in Moscow, it's full of people from Central Asia and other places around the world, and they just take people in. And the same with Trump. When Trump came to power, immigration suddenly wasn't a problem anymore. Most people who are Republicans and who don't want immigration to the US, when Trump is in power, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. They don't really care about this issue. But when Democrats are in power, they do care. So I think I agree with what was said, but I think that at the same time, it's a lot about not giving this monopoly to the far right on this issue. And it's important to have mainstream parties talk about this issue and try to find solutions for it. But I think a lot of it is also a bit of the complex side with this is that birth rates are actually really low. And I think Elon Musk is right on that, even if he's not right on it for the right reasons, but he's right on the fact that we have very low birth rates. And I think that no country has succeeded at really improving those birth rates, even if they've spent a lot of money. Hungary, for example,
Hungary
has exactly 5% of their GDP on that per year, and they still don't manage to change that. So I
think 5% of GDP in Hungary?
I think at some point, some years they've spent something like that on birth-related spending.
That's amazing.
it's really a lot. And what they do is you have the curve, it's going down, then they increase the spending, it will stop for 1 year, and then it keeps going down after that. So it doesn't work to spend. People don't get more children just because you give them money. But at the same time, we still live in a system where markets make it so that you need to have population growth if you don't want to decline in the long run. So I think we'll need immigration, but at the same time, as you said, mainstream parties need to take the discussion back and not give it to the far right, not ignore the issues. We can have immigration while still being tough on criminals and while still trying to push for more integration and so on. So it's not so black and white, and we will need more immigration in the future. There's no way around it, and there will be more immigration because of global warming and so on. We will just not be able to avoid it, but we need to make it so that once it arrives, we have a better integration and more control over the rhetoric. So but it was very interesting points. I agree with what both of you said.
I'm interested. What do you guys think? Because you guys live in Europe, what do you think is behind? Obviously, a lot of it is sort of exaggerated by MAGA folks about how like Europe, they portray this picture of Europe in full decline, which is not true. Like, I mean, I was in Poland and Ukraine very recently, and like when I was in Poland, like you see like very like impressive economic development around the place, and I think they're actually on track to almost surpass Japan in GDP per capita in the next year or something, which is just amazing. So there is another side to this, but I'm wondering, you guys live in Europe, what do you think is necessary to try to keep the populace at bay? Like, how do you reboost economic growth, make it so that people can have more children? Because obviously, like, a big part of it is economic insecurity. People aren't feeling like they can, start a family, etc. What do you guys think is needed to, like, make Europe into a proper superpower? That's what I want to see happen. I want to see Europe, like, actually become a proper real-world superpower.
I don't think that there's any easy solution to get this done, because I think, again, that birth rates are not going to increase even with more economic security. Because if we look around the world, even in the countries that have the most economic security still have very, very low birth rates, and they continue declining. So unfortunately, I don't think that more economic security will bring higher birth rates, because when countries get developed...
What's the actual birth rate in like a place like Finland? Because we all know like Finland has like an amazing social democracy and a good welfare state and stuff. I'm interested. I don't actually know that stat off the top of my head. What actually is it like?
It's one of the lowest in Europe. I think we have the third oldest population in the world or something. So we have a very low birth rate. I don't remember the exact number, but it's just very low. And unfortunately, it seems to be low in all developed welfare states. And because of that, I don't have a lot of hope for higher birth rates based on better social policy, because obviously, and it's a good thing, when you have more equality, you also get more careers for women, and because of that, obviously, they don't have the incentive to have as many children often, and so on. And obviously, in countries that have good welfare states and well-developed welfare states, we have systems to allow people to have children and still continue their careers and so on, but somehow it doesn't increase the birth rate. So I think because of that, we will need some immigration. But and I'm also now one of those who calls for massive deregulation, because when you look at cases like X and TikTok and so on, I think we don't have enough regulation. But overall, there's no easy way for Europe to get out of this. But I think what you talked about, this strategic thinking and strategic investments that Macron is pushing, I think Macron might be doing it for some of the wrong reasons in some cases, and his views are not always right on China and issues like this. But overall, he's right about the fact that because of a lack of strategic thinking, we haven't been investing enough in strategic industries, and we need to do that. And if we do that, we have a lot of potential in Europe to sell a lot of products and services around the world, because we have a lot of people and a lot of industrial capacity. And as you said, we've shot some bullets in our own legs with Germany moving away from nuclear energy and so on. But I think that it's still possible for Europe to make some big things if we decide to do so.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so the birth rate was 1.25 in 2024 in Finland. It's terrible. This is definitely one of the biggest problems that the whole globe is kind of facing. There, I watched like maybe a year ago. I watched this podcast where some American dude was just explaining that one of the future superpowers could actually be Mexico, because they have been able to keep up their birth rate relatively high, whereas countries like Japan will be in massive decline, which is probably true, and South Korea. I mean, I think they have one of the lowest fertility rates in the world.
It's like 0.9. Yeah.
The thing about Europe is that there's a lot of regulation related to there's not that much innovation. So there's this saying like the United States innovates and then the EU regulates, and is it China? What was it? They steal everything.
I know what you're saying though. Yeah, I've heard that one before.
But anyway, like the EU is in decline mostly probably because there is not much room for innovation, and I think we can see that from this kind of I've been trying to do kind of a boycotting of American products because of their foreign policy mainly, and so I've realized that it's very difficult to replace some American products, especially services. Like all large digital services are American, and it's very difficult to replace them. I mean, we are doing this podcast with American product. We are publishing it on American platforms. All these big social media platforms are American, but that's also the reason why they are so afraid of EU in America. Because if EU starts regulating social media heavily, this would be a massive hit for these big tech giants like Meta and of course even Elon Musk's services, because they would lose a huge market of Europeans if there's a massive regulatory project. So I think this is something that we are lacking in the EU is innovation still. There are some good signs. I mean, Sweden has been amazing at innovation for a long time. They have Spotify. They have even IKEA I see as a very innovative project. So there are these kind of powerhouses. But there definitely the EU is lacking in this sense. And I'm every day I see myself thinking like Europe should come up with their own social media platform that is good, that becomes popular among Europeans and of course people from other countries too. But we need competition for the American giants.
It's interesting. What do you think, Pekka, about the idea? Like, there's obviously many different schools of thought about how to respond to the crazy tariff situation at the moment. I mean, I see that you're advocating like sort of wholesale boycott of American stuff. I don't know. This is just my perspective. I'm wondering what you think. Is it better to try and boycott things that are linked to like Trump, like for example, like businesses that are like that are really close to Trump, so for example, like Elon stuff, and trying to while trying to kind of like steer clear of maybe attacking businesses that aren't aligned with the Trump administration? Or do you think or do you advocate like the sort of full wholesale boycotting? I'm interested in what you think.
I mean, at this point, which businesses are not connected to Trump? I feel like everybody's been politically, economically cuckolded by Trump administration. They're just sucking up to him. So I don't know. Like, okay, maybe there are some, Bloomberg, for example, but there's so few. And nobody is really speaking against him because they know how vindictive the man can be. So he can come back in 10 years and just kind of take a revenge on you. And so he's still, like, even today he was dropping these names of people who attacked him, or, well, they didn't attack him. They tried to, these lawsuits and so on. So judges and etc. But let's talk about Liberation Day, because we haven't really. It was Liberation Day. Was it yesterday?
Yeah,
was it yesterday? Yeah. Okay. So and it wasn't April Fool's because it was the 2nd of April. 3rd of April. So how do you see Liberation Day? What's going on besides the penguins being tariffed? What are the key points here?
That was an Australian external territory actually. The one with penguins in the South Indian Ocean. What was it again? It was like St. Howard's or something like that. Yeah, just nuts, isn't it? Just so nuts. Bloody hell! What can you even say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's crazy is that first of all, it seems like they actually used ChatGPT or something to make the tariffs, and they lied about the method they used to calculate the tariffs. What I don't understand is that, I mean, there is actually a point to be made as an American to have reciprocity in tariffs, and there's been a bit of an issue with that over time. I don't know how true it is, but my father says that, for example, he works in a construction company. When they sell a house to the US, they get tariffed less than if an American sells one to Europe. I guess there are some cases where there is no perfect reciprocity, but it's not a big difference. It's like a couple percent difference in some cases. But if Trump would say, okay, I want to have reciprocity on tariffs with everyone, I think everyone would find that okay. There's no issue if some country tariffs you more, then you can tariff them back at the same rate. That's fine. But now what he's doing is he's kind of like mixing it up. He's mixing the trade deficit with that. And then at the same time, he's also trying to use tariffs. He's saying that it's a way to replace income tax. But at the same time, he's saying it's only a threat and it can be negotiated. But if it's there to replace the income tax, then you shouldn't negotiate it. You should just keep it. So he's kind of like mixing things up, and it doesn't make sense. And there's no predictability for the markets. If you would have done it in a smart way with reciprocity and with announcing things clearly, then the markets wouldn't go down as much. But he's just an agent of chaos, and even on that, he just manages to ruin everything. So it's it's crazy. It's
just incompetence.
Yeah,
it's incompetence, man. Because like as you said, you could have done it in a smart way. If it was truly reciprocal, if it was about like, okay, you tariff us 7% on this specific item, we'll do 7% back on that specific item. Like that's very hard to denounce, right? If he was doing exactly that, that's very hard to denounce. And also equally, if he was just like targeting, for example, authoritarian states while, keeping free trade with democratic allies, that's actually probably a system that I favor. I kind of favor like the West should just sort of like trade with, democratic countries should mostly trade within ourselves, and we should try avoid it wherever we can, like, dictatorships and that sort of stuff. But it's not about that at all. He's actually just going, the formula they made was just the trade deficit by imports times 0.2 times 0.5, sorry. It just like this insane calculation that they literally came up with on ChatGPT. And then somebody worked out as well that the reason why there were like external territories that were tariffed at crazy rates, and like they were like treated as though they were actually independent countries. A really good example of this was like Saint-Pierre, the really small French chain of islands, like right off the coast of Newfoundland, I think it is. And it's only 5,000 people, and they put a 99% tariff rate on it. And then they discounted it to 50%. But that was based off like the fact that, this is a really small island. Somebody in America apparently bought like a $2 or $3 million contract for lobsters. And this island, which is just tiny, has 5,000 people, didn't immediately buy like, 3,000 Tesla Cybertrucks or whatever in response. And then therefore, according to the calculation, the deficit and, the deficit rate with that particular small territory is like 95%, and that they come up with this 99% tariff rate. It's just insane.
It is.
And and they target the democratic allies, and they also target countries that you need as well as strategic alliances against, things like, for example, the rise of Chinese Communist Party. Vietnam is a really good example of this. So it's crazy. It's just crazy.
It is. And one last thing, I think the reason some of these countries some of these places like Saint-Pierre and Miquelon and so on have been there is because they have internet domains. And apparently the list was based on internet domains. So for example, in France, there's Réunion, which is an island near Africa, which is, it's France. It's not it's crazy.
Overseas department or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But they just use the internet domains to list the countries. So crazy.
Does the Vatican City they don't have their own internet domain because they were excluded, right?
Right. Is that seriously, like, that's why they were excluded? That's crazy.
I don't know. It could be. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me.
Russia and North Korea have internet domains probably, and Russia was excluded as well. So
Belarus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was this. Some of this MAGA types were saying that we do not do business with Russia, but there is business between Russia and the United States. I say so it's not nothing. It's not much, but it's not nothing, and it's more than Russia deals with the Ukraine. So it's still something, and still no tariffs. So
Iran
I think there's
tariffed.
something going on there.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
You know what was interesting as well? This was actually a surprising one. He tariffed Israel higher than Iran, and no one could even really work that one out. Because Israel the day before had actually cut all tariffs on American goods, like in advance of Liberation Day, and then he slapped them with a 17% tariff, and it was literally higher than what he gave to Iran. And just I don't know, no one can figure it out because, obviously Trump loves Israel and they're very close with Bibi Netanyahu and stuff. But for some reason, he just put in place this crazy, massive tariff on it. Just no one can really work out the strategy or the logic here behind. He did it to He did it to the British Indian Ocean territories, which is like literally just the Diego Garcia military base, which is joint British American base. And it's like they're tariffing their own US military base. What the hell's going on?
Yeah, but I think in the case of Israel, if this was done with ChatGPT, then they probably just made ChatGPT do it, and then ChatGPT put a tariff on Israel based on the trade balance, and that's it. They didn't check it out, and they just published it.
Yeah, I think people overlook the fact that they're so fucking stupid. I think that's basically the whole idea behind this Liberation Day is that they are so stupid that they have to use a GPT system to come up with kind of a tariff mechanism, and then they set parameters so that they rule out each other. So you know about this. So there was this multiplier of 4, and then there was multiplier of 0.25. So they rule out each other. It becomes 1, and that's basically. So it's like high school math done in ChatGPT, fed with internet domain addresses. So, and then you have this nice list that Donald Trump is presenting on live television, and the markets just plummet. And I feel like they will say that they are negotiating, but they will drop some of these tariffs. I'm pretty sure of it, because I don't think they can keep up like this. Just the popularity, like the decrease in popularity politically, they are running to midterms and so on. So I don't think they can keep up doing things like this.
Imagine grocery prices go up 20, 30%, stuff like that. Like that's like an electoral killer. That's what killed Biden. Like Biden had like 6-7% inflation, and that was enough for Biden to be defeated and install crazy maniac Trump. That's 7% inflation. Imagine now, like when he's suddenly putting 50% tariffs on some goods, it's gonna make prices explode probably across large sections of the economy.
And if you add to that they're also trying to cut down on immigration, and a lot of the states in the south of the US depend on immigration for labor, for agriculture and everything. So that's also going to have an impact. And if you have tariffs with the idea of bringing jobs back to the US, but at the same time you cut on the number of workers by cutting immigration, you're just going to have massive inflation, just like in Russia in a way with the war.
Yeah. Joni, you know what's a really good example of this? You know how you were saying earlier, like the far right people, they don't care about immigration numbers when like Trump's in power and stuff like that? You know what's a really good example of this? Apparently he said yesterday, I didn't watch the full speech, but I read that he said something like, we're going to need to have more immigrants to, staff the factories we're going to build as a result of these tariffs. And I was like, dude, like imagine Biden did this. Imagine Biden suddenly, exploded prices across the economy, tariffs everything, and then he says, we need heaps of immigrants to build these factories. Imagine how upset MAGA would be. It's just crazy. Like there's no internal consistency or logic or anything.
No, they're party hacks. It's the same with the signal gates. When it's Hillary, Hillary can share some food recipe on her private email and they will talk about it for 5 years. But if it's Trump and his administration, they couldn't care less. He could send all the war plans to Russia and they would say that it's 5D chess. And
5D chess. I love that one.
Yeah, crazy.
Like the stupidity always comes. The response to the stupidity by the hacks and the cult members is always, well, it's just 5D chess. You can't see the moves that are being played ahead here. And
Exactly.
it's just like it's just so stupid.
It is.
Was it Florida or Texas who changed their work laws so that people under 18 can work more freely?
Yeah.
They can do overnight work. Which one was
Florida,
it?
I think.
Florida, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, they are already screwed up due to this deportation project, this deportation, massive deportations. So they are running out of workforce because a lot of these jobs were done. So now they're just borrowing people from schools and so on because, I mean, who cares about education and all that? So
Can you imagine if they have like child labor sweatshops making Nike shoes in Florida? Like, is that the future MAGA wants? It's just insanity.
Yeah, just bring in Vietnam and China to the United States. That's basically the. I don't know. I think it's just crazy. And like Trump saying that we can do everything in the United States, and some people saying that we should grow our own coffee here. And it's just. I have no words. I have no words for this madness. But also at the same time, I'm actually kind of enjoying. Again, it's. Like enjoying watching this huge fire and see how it spreads and so on. But at the same time, it's a tragedy because so many people will lose their jobs. And at the same time, we have this massive boost in AI, GPTs and AI development. So even with that, people are losing their jobs. So it's going to be like adding up. And this will have massive consequences for both, of course, the whole world basically, because it's if you have recession, if you have depression in the United States, it will also affect Europe. It will affect China. It will affect every country in the world basically, even the penguins. So it's I don't know. It's I kind of enjoy watching it, but it's also a tragedy.
Pekka, you know what it reminded me of? You know Enver Hoxha, the crazy Albanian like communist dictator during like the Cold War? Apparently, like, you know, during the height of like, he's like, because he like had this insane isolationist system where like he was against like every other communist country on earth. And so they built like bunkers on like every single street. It's just such a crazy story. But apparently, like, you know, when he was advocating like essentially like Juche, North Korea style, like self-sufficiency economics, apparently like he was saying like we're going to be able to grow bananas in Albania, which is like, you know, like, and this is the kind of mindset of Trump. It's like literally like we're going to grow bananas in like North Dakota. Obviously they've got tropic areas in like Florida and stuff, but it just the where the coffee plantation is going to come from, like it's just crazy, this stuff.
But the way it goes with this usually is it starts with we're gonna grow bananas in North Dakota or whatever, and then the next step is who needs bananas because there's no bananas, and then it's just
Did you see some of the tweets from like the MAGA ultra loyalists where they were going like, you don't need an iPad, you don't need a MacBook? Like,
the quartering.
They're like embrace poverty. Like,
imagine if Democrats would be writing something like that. Benny Johnson and Charlie Kirk, they would go crazy. They would just talk about it all the time.
Yeah, and when you think about it, this is something like this is their biggest conspiracy theory is Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. Is like you will own nothing and you'll be happy. And then basically they're doing the same thing now in the States. You don't need iPad. You don't need consumerism. You need to get away from that kind of thinking. And that's basically, it's the same idea. They just recycled into the MAGA sphere, and they're now spreading it there.
Recycled for owning the libs.
Yeah, that's why you have to ridicule them. That's why you have to laugh at them, because they are so ridiculous. There's no consistency. There is no consistent policy on anything. It's just vibes. It's just wild, like chaos. As Joni said, agent of chaos. There's no. How can you work? For example, if you're an investor, how can you work in this kind of environment? Where do you invest? Is crypto? I don't know.
Yeah.
Dude, they wiped out 5 trillion in value. Sorry, you go ahead, Joni.
No, I think it was a good point also to just say that we need to mock them and make fun of them, because that's one way they managed to get back into power, was that their influencers and their people on social media in general were really good at making fun of Joe Biden and Democrats and the woke and everything, and we need to do that to them as well. We've been I mean,
They're
when
more
I say we,
ridiculous.
yeah, exactly. And when I say we, obviously I'm not American, but just in general, people who oppose authoritarians should make fun of them when they're in power.
Yeah, just compare it to Juche economics, man, because it's like literally North Korea style economics.
Exactly.
It's just nuts.
Yeah.
Well, that's my theory. I've got the theory that like, and obviously, like, you know, people might say like it's a terrible theory because, you know, Trump is very American. We all know that. But like, I like to try to say, like, you know, it's not that American or even Western really. It's like literally kind of like a third worldist ideology. It's kind of like you know, the ideology that you would expect from, like, you know, Chairman Mao or like North Korea. Like it's really like it's so like sort of alien to, like, you know, the liberal Western tradition like that we've all grown up with. Where does this stuff come from? It really is crazy. It's stuff like, it's like Hugo Chavez from Venezuela. Like yeah. This stuff is like, I think it's a good point to make. Like this is like not very American what he's even doing really. Like it's not even really Western. It's just this kind of like bizarre, like he's taking like sort of like Maoist third world economics and like sort of like trying to rejig it for America. It's crazy.
And the other theory is that he might be a secret climate activist trying to push degrowth around the world.
That's a good one, actually.
Yeah, but what about China? I mean, they are rejoicing. They are probably extremely happy right now. They have flying taxi cars and they have bird drones and they are taking AI to the next level. I mean, even before they were kind of the leading force on AI, they will probably get a good lead from now on also. Like even a bigger lead. So like what is China thinking right now? What are your thoughts?
They would be so happy. Right? Like their main geopolitical goal for the past like 20, 30 years is like split Europe off from America and like split off like countries in the you know, Pacific periphery like Vietnam, etc. Split them off from, you know, America and its growing influence there. And like Trump's just doing it for them. It's just crazy. Like this is literally the strategy that Xi Jinping would take if he was the American president and wanted to destroy America's influence. It's crazy. Like this is what they've wanted for so long. You break America off from Europe and you break America off from all its allies in Asia, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and increasingly, you know, Vietnam was increasingly an ally as well of America and Asia, which I guess, you know, that's really flown under the radar for a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize that, like you know, the history of the Vietnam War was kind of buried by the Vietnamese communist leadership because, you know, Vietnam had a history of, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years fighting against Chinese colonialism. And so like they were trying to balance America and China, and they've now blown that up. China's like Trump's now blown that up. It's just crazy. It's like literally exactly what they want. I can't even describe it. It's amazing.
Yeah. In terms of geopolitical moves as well, when you look at Hegseth, he's supposed to cut the size of the military. And at the same time, they're moving assets to the Middle East right now from Asia. They moved some air defense a few days ago. And obviously for Taiwan, that's not a really great message to send to China, because if you move assets away from Asia, it's kind of like a welcome to invade. So I mean, and everything all the messaging on Russia, all the messaging on Ukraine, all of this just gives an incentive to China to do whatever they want. So yeah, obviously, as you said, for China, it's great news. I think for China, it's a bit both ways. There's also some bad news. I think the tariffs are not necessarily only a good thing for China. The cutting USAID and so on, that's great, but the tariffs might be a problem because China exports tons to the US. But for Russia, all of this is great news, even more than for China, because Russia was kind of on a path to decline, and it still is, obviously, but this gives them some breathing space because Trump is really doing his best to help them.
Okay, let's talk briefly about Russia. Their economy is the size of pretty much like Spain and Portugal combined, right?
Yeah.
Why is the greatest superpower, the United States, sucking up to country this size? And there's not much business there. And I don't see the point in why they are doing this. Why not put more sanctions on Russia? Why are they is it Trump or is it something else? Do they have some grand plan? Okay, we're going to do something with Russia, or is it the Arctic? Maybe Joni, you have some insights on this, because I'm just completely baffled. I'm just confused on what the fuck is going on between Trump and Putin right now.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. It's not only Trump. I mean, we can think that Trump might be an asset and he might be doing this to help Russia. But even outside of that, there are lots of Americans in the right, within isolationists and realists like Mearsheimer and so on, who have been pushing this idea that the US needs to move away from Europe and the US needs to focus on China. And because of that, the US needs to get China and Russia not to be friends, because the biggest threat to the US is if China and Russia are friends. And because of that, there's this branch among Republicans and realists in the US who really think that it's important to give everything away to Russia and appease Russia so that Russia doesn't side with China over the US. And I think those people are scammers, they're fraudsters, because obviously these same people who have been saying that for the last 10 or 20 years, now that Taiwan is under threat, they're saying, okay, Taiwan is maybe not making enough efforts. Maybe we don't need to help Taiwan. So there's a lot of these people, Elbridge, Colby, and all these people. They've been pushing this, but I think that it's a combination. Because of that, the Arctic probably plays a role, and just the fact that they're not looking at economic data so much because they're isolationists. They don't care so much about how big Europe is. Europe is obviously 10 times the size of Russia economically, but they're not planning on increasing trade with Europe. So for them, it's not really an issue. And there's so many of these intellectuals in the US that these people follow, like Curtis Yarvin and so on, who love these authoritarian regimes and love this image that Russia has. Obviously, they live in San Francisco and they don't want to move to Russia or China, but they're happy to praise Russia and China from San Francisco. So it's a combination of that, combined with lots of very successful Russian hybrid operations and information operations that have managed to influence the US to think that. And Russia also has tons of natural resources that these people care about that are not seen in the GDP, but that make Russia valuable in their eyes. And Russia has this capacity to sacrifice 1 million Russians if needed. And that's something that people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump tend to like. So yeah, exactly. So it's a combination of reasons, but then you can never forget the fact that Trump might actually be compromised in a way, because some of these decisions make no sense, but they would make sense if you would just think that he's compromised. So,
good example of that is Nord Stream.
Yeah.
Of that is Nord Stream, because like American gas is directly competing with Russian gas in Europe, but he's advocating Nord Stream, and so you
Exactly.
look at that and you're like, if you were an American patriot, America first guy, say you were full on isolationist, America first, why would you be advocating that Russia sell more gas to Europe instead of yourself selling more gas to Europe? It doesn't even make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, it's some of these things just make no sense. And again, yesterday or 2 days ago, they took sanctions away from a Russian oligarch's wife, and he happens to be one that's very close to Putin. And again, they added some sanctions. I think they added 5 names to the sanction list. So they're just, as Pekka said earlier, they're not pressuring Russia. They're doing nothing to do that. And it's just hard to understand this administration on that. It makes no sense. And it's not only that Russia is a small economy, but Russia is also an economy that's not going up. Their birth rates are really bad. Their demographics are horrible. So the way for them is they're trending down. So it just makes absolutely no sense if you forget the geopolitical aspect of it. And I don't know. I wonder how many of those influencers, people like Mearsheimer or Elbridge Colby and all those people who have influenced this thinking in the US, I wonder how many of them actually have some ties with Russia. Because I studied at MGIMO in Moscow, which is the School of International Affairs of Russia. It's the school of Lavrov. It's the school that produces all the diplomats in Russia. And we had Mearsheimer as a lecturer there. And
really, what year was this?
That was 2000, and I was in Russia in 2015, 16, 17. And back in the days, Mearsheimer was lecturing us, and he was already saying that Ukraine needs to be cut in pieces, and some of it needs to be given to Russia. Or he didn't say to Russia, but some of it needs to be more independent, some of it needs to be more Ukraine. But he was already very pro-Russia back then. And I wonder if he has some. I don't know if they blackmail him. I don't know if they pay him. I don't know what's the reason, but for some reason he's been doing that. And Mearsheimer is an influential guy. He's someone that Obama used to listen to back in the day. So he's not like a nobody. And I wonder just how deep, because
Obama had a
China
bad foreign policy.
exactly. And
He was bad
did.
on Russia.
He was very bad, and it was probably influenced by Mearsheimer in a way. And I just wonder, because China has been really good at infiltrating universities in the West, but Russia is really good at infiltrating everything. We had a professor in the school in MGIMO, which was a guy who was an ex agent, basically, who got caught. There's a series that has been done about his life that's called The Americans. And he was teaching the guys, he was teaching a course called Strategic Intelligence, and telling stories. And Russia just inherited this massive capacity to have these agents everywhere and sleeper agents everywhere from the USSR, and they still have it today. And I just wonder how many of these people who help Russia in a way in the West, whether it's Mearsheimer, but there's so many others, I wonder how many of them get paid by Russia, because the ones that get caught are just the tip of the iceberg. Tim Pool and so on, that's easy to catch them, but then when you look at it, there's just so much more. And it's insane. By paying someone, I'm not saying that Mearsheimer is paid, but if they would somehow pay Mearsheimer to do what he's doing, it's a very good investment, because if the guy is listened to by all American leaders, it's just a very good investment.
You know, the crazy thing is nothing even happened to persons. Nothing even happened to people like Tim Pool when they were caught.
Exactly.
You know, taking money. Like nothing even happens to them. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, there are no negative sides to taking Russian money right now. There are no consequences. It doesn't matter, even if you're paid. Then well, you get money. And some people will be like, okay, you did bad thing there, but that's it. There's no. I mean, even with the Tenet Media case, the owners of Tenet Media will they'll walk free. There won't be that much consequences. But okay, let's wrap it up. We are close to the end, so let's have some ending thoughts. Drew, you can start.
I was going to say, like on that question, Pekka, about like, you know, why would America side with Russia, which is like, you know, 1/10 the size of the European economy? And I think like they literally fell for all this stupid propaganda about like, you know, Russia is the last savior of Western civilization. You know, Putin is a real man. He's fighting against, you know, they literally use the term globo homo, blah, blah, blah. They fell for all this stuff. It's crazy. Like, and I honestly think a big reason why they hate Ukraine is because like in their minds, Russia was supposed to be like, you know, the big, tough, like the one world power that was sort of like anti-woke or whatever. And, you know, remember, like, for example, here's a good example. You know, when they had the Russian military recruitment ads, and it was very funny because apparently, like, the main actor in that ad was actually a gay model. But all the MAGA guys and like Ted Cruz, they were sharing this Russian military ad going like, my God, man, like this is so tough. Our woke military can't compete with this. This is why they're so much stronger than us. And I think the reason why they have to hate Ukraine so much is like Ukraine sort of like blew that whole narrative up, because in their worldview, they should have just completely, you know, steamrolled through Ukraine. They should have taken Ukraine in 3 days. And so it doesn't make sense for them why this, you know, like anti-woke power, that it doesn't have the decadence of the West and Western liberalism. It doesn't make sense for them why this power was so quickly kind of like, you know, like in the Battle of Kiev, why was it defeated in the Battle of Kiev? It doesn't compute in their worldview. And I think like as a result, they just have this like pathological hatred of like Ukraine and Zelensky, and they actually really, really need Russia to win because it like validates their worldview. Like it validates their worldview that, you know, the West is decadent, the West is in decline. The reason why we're in decline is because of wokeness and gays and transgenders and Muslim, blah, blah, blah. This is their whole narrative, right? And in their world, Russia's the counter opposite of that, which is so funny because, you know, like I literally saw a video like 2 months ago, like Putin went to Chechnya, which is literally like a Sharia law statelet governed by an Islamist warlord, Kadyrov. And he was like, and Putin was kissing, you know, a gold-plated Quran. Yet all these like far-right influencers in Europe are like, wow, Putin's the one person who's not part of this fallen Europe, fallen to the immigrants and all this stuff. I think they just like, they have to hate Ukraine. They've already tied themselves to this idea. And so now it's like a suicide death cult. Like they have to go all in. Russia must win. because otherwise, like, they just can't accept that, like, Russia's corrupt, Russia's backwards, if Russia's corrupt and backwards and, basically like a poor middle income country that is basically a shithole because it's run by gangsters, if that's the truth, which that is the truth, we all know that's the truth of Russia. But if they have to accept that, like, that's devastating for them, because they look at Russia and they're like, that's what we want for here. And if people can see the reality that Russia is like almost like a borderline failed state, because it can't really actually fulfill the wishes of the population other than just sending out human meat waves in Ukraine, it's devastating for the far right. It's devastating for all these right wingers and the nationalists and the hyper masculinity, like, Andrew Tate warriors and stuff like that. And Joni, you're so right as well. Like, how they were saying, oh, we have to go all in with Russia because we'll do a reverse Nixon. We'll break Russia off from China, so we can defend Taiwan. Like, we had Andrew Tate Andrew Tate was saying that he wants China to invade Taiwan because Taiwan has drag queens. There's that Lord Miles guy, that sort of like British guy who went and, goes off and films with the Taliban and shit like that. And he's like a bit of a troll. He made a post yesterday saying that he wanted China to invade because, there was pictures of gay people in Taiwan. So they're already starting the Ukraine playbook on Taiwan. Seriously, the second, if China starts up in Taiwan, and I think unfortunately the timeline for an invasion or takeover is accelerated because of what's happened recently with the Liberation Day. If China starts up, everything that they've done to Ukraine with, all the narratives like Zelensky's this like gay Jewish Nazi puppet, like just all the insane, like they'll get videos of him and say he's transgender, like all this mental stuff, like all the weird pathologies they try and project onto Ukraine. They're going to do all of that to Taiwan 100%.
100%. Yeah, no, I think those were really good points, and I agree with everything. And once again, a bit like with immigration, I think it's a lot about perceptions and not so much about facts. So as long as they can keep it up with this image of Russia being this Christian, conservative, strong nation, that's the key for them. And to comment on what you said about the army, it's just, everyone who has served or been a soldier in their life knows that it's not the most macho guy who talks the loudest that ends up being the best soldier at the end. A lot of people who have great military careers as officers or sub-officers are guys who are just normal, regular people. They can be open-minded. They can have whatever sexuality. It doesn't matter. It's just usually there's a quite strong correlation with intelligence as well. The people who perform well in the army tend to be quite smart. It's not the dumbest people who perform well. So it's
not the cavemen, stone men. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why the guys in the Russians don't perform that well militarily. Countries, for example, Northern Europe people in Northern Europe are quite open-minded, and I'm quite convinced that militaries in Northern Europe are quite powerful for the size of the countries, and the soldiers are quite good. And it's because you don't need to be you can be open-minded and you can be intelligent, and you don't need to be a macho to be a good soldier. So that's something.
Really good example of this. You know how I remember like the MAGA guys and the Russia propagandists, they made a massive deal out of, I think Sweden had a military ad that had like sort of like rainbow colors in it for LGBT candidates. I remember they made such a big deal out of that, going like, oh, look at Sweden, what a joke and stuff. But honestly, like if Russia was going up against Sweden, I would 100% put my money on Sweden. If it was just like direct peer-to-peer conflict with conventional weapons, no nuclear, I think Sweden would wipe the floor with them, which is crazy.
Yeah. And Sweden is obviously a small country. It's 4 times smaller than Ukraine, so there's the size issue that would come there and so on. But obviously, if you would have like let's say the war never happens that way, but let's say if you would have a battle where there's as many Swedes and as many Russians on some field fighting, even if it doesn't work that way, Swedes would perform really well against Russians for sure. So I agree. And it's even in the U.S. Army, they've been saying that it's woke and so on, but the U.S. Army tends to perform quite well, and they're quite powerful, and I think they perform quite much, like a lot better than Russia does. And if you look at the Chechens that you talked about, the Chechens in Ukraine, they're probably not performing that well neither, and they're these very tough guys who do MMA and who have a beard and who talk so much and so on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't help so much, because you need to plan things and you need to have everything is so complicated in a war, and complicated things don't work for people who are dumb. So,
do you remember at the start of the war when they had Kadyrov and they had like all the lineups of like, you know, Chechen men in front of him and everything, and they like made this big propaganda show, like they're gonna roll in and just destroy the Ukrainians. And I remember it was like the first day or the second day, like Kadyrov's number 2 just got sniped, like straight up, and it was just such a good example of like their whole masculine, like their whole like idea that like to be the biggest man is like just cavemen, bash rock against skull, like these guys just get crushed when they go up. And
I mean, you were in Ukraine not so long ago, and you probably met some soldiers there, and a lot of the guys who are actual heroes and who have done a lot to defend their country, they're just regular, normal people. They don't need to act tough in front of you. They're very tough people, but they don't need to. If you're tough, you don't need to act tough 24/7 in front of people just to have an act.
Yeah, exactly. Like the guys I saw, I met soldiers and stuff, and like the guys I met weren't like bodybuilders with like, you know, like Arnold Schwarzenegger physique or whatever. They were literally just like normal guys. You would just, if you were just walking down the street in like, you know, my city, Brisbane or whatever, like it's that type of just normal guy, but they're literally tough as nails. So yeah, exactly.
All right, let's wrap it up. I think that was a good ending. I think we could even make a separate episode about warriors of Ukraine and so on and all
That'd be
this.
Good.
So I don't have any closing thoughts. Liberation Day was crazy. I hope Ukraine will prevail over barbaric Russia. And I think we have endless amount of topics we can discuss in the future episodes. But for now, I thank everyone and who listened. I want to thank Drew. I want to thank Joni, and we'll do this again ASAP.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was great.